The first time Karen banged on my shed door, the sound was so loud it startled the birds roosting along the power lines. Her shrill voice carried across the yards, slicing through the quiet of an early Saturday morning. "This eyesore is coming down today. I've already filed a complaint with the HOA," she screeched, her arms folded like a dictator ready to pass sentence. I remember wiping the dirt from my palms and stepping out, facing her like someone bracing for a storm. She stood there, round and smug, practically vibrating with self-importance, her clipboard clutched in one hand like it was a weapon. "I built that shed myself 10 years ago, reinforced on all sides, with a drainage channel carved behind it leading down toward the creek. People thought it was just storage for my tools and lumber, but it was more than that. It was a shield. After the heavy floods of 2013, I had re-engineered my backyard to keep water from pooling up and washing downhill toward the houses behind mine. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't in glossy HOA brochures, but it worked. And Karen, with her manicured nails tapping her clipboard, had no idea the shed she despised was the reason her basement hadn't been underwater for years. I tried reason. I explained the grading, the runoff, the culvert hidden beneath the gravel. But she waved her hand like swatting a fly. "Excuses. I don't care about your imaginary engineering projects. The HOA rules say no detached structures within 15 feet of the property line. Yours is exactly 12. Do the math." She smirked like she had cornered me in a courtroom. That's when my blood boiled. Not just because she was wrong, but because she had no interest in truth. She wanted control. She wanted to stand taller by shoving me down. And I wasn't going to let her. I told her flat out, "Touch my shed, and you'll regret it." She scoffed, calling me dramatic, but I saw something flicker in her eyes like she wasn't used to people standing their ground. 3 days later, I came home to find spray paint across the shed doors. "Remove now." The paint dripped like blood, still fresh, the stench of chemicals choking me as I stood there. My tools inside were overturned, shovels scattered like broken bones. And deep in the mud were prints her pink gardening boots, patterned with sunflowers. She had done it herself. My hands shook with rage, but instead of yelling, I grabbed my phone. I documented everything, every streak of paint, every boot print, every scrap of paper she left behind. The real turning point came when I called the city inspector. Not an HOA crony, not a neighbor, but a licensed engineer who looked at the grading and shook his head. He said, "If this shed goes, the water will have nowhere to slow down. You'd have a small river cutting through the properties downhill." He wasn't talking about my yard. He was talking about hers. The next HOA meeting was supposed to be her victory parade. Karen stormed in like a queen, flanked by her loyal lackeys, with copies of bylaws stapled in binders. She stood at the front, declaring my shed a violation, demanding immediate demolition. People muttered and nodded, some afraid of her wrath, others too tired to fight. Then I raised my hand, calm, steady, and with a folder of my own. I projected photos of the vandalism first. The shed with her spray paint, her sunflower boot prints pressed into the mud. Gasps filled the room, whispers spreading like fire. Karen's face flushed, and she tried to wave it off. "That proves nothing," she snapped, but her voice cracked. Then I brought up the inspector's report. Pages stamped with the city seal, diagrams showing the drainage path. "This shed doesn't just store tools," I said, my voice rising with every word. "It diverts water away from the very homes Karen pretends to protect, including hers." For the first time in months, people turned on her. They weren't afraid anymore. One man, whose basement had flooded years before I built the shed, stood up and said, "If he takes it down, my kids won't have a playroom anymore, they'll have a swamp." Another woman added, "Karen, you told us this was about community safety. Turns out it's the opposite." Karen's jaw worked like she wanted to scream, but no sound came. She stammered about aesthetic integrity and property values. But the room was gone from her grip. The HOA president, usually spineless, finally cleared his throat and said, "Given this evidence, the shed stays." That should have been enough. But fate wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, A storm slammed through the valley, one of those flash floods that turn driveways into rivers in minutes. I was out in the rain, checking the culvert, when I saw the water rushing down. My shed stood firm, redirecting the torrent into the channel. But I heard a scream from across the fence. Karen's yard was filling fast, her pool nearly overflowing, her garden underwater. I ran over, and what I saw made me freeze. The water from uphill was slamming against her property line, carving trenches, but it stopped short of her house because the shed held. She stood in the downpour, mascara streaking her face, clutching her drenched clipboard like it could save her. And for the first time, I saw not arrogance, but fear. She looked at me, eyes wide, and I knew she finally understood. But understanding doesn't erase damage. Word of the storm spread. Neighbors whispered that without my shed, their homes would have been destroyed. Local news even came by, filming the runoff paths, interviewing the inspector. The story went public, and suddenly Karen wasn't the hero she imagined. She was the villain who tried to destroy the very thing protecting everyone else. And just when she thought it couldn't get worse, the twist came. A retired city planner who happened to live 2 blocks away stepped forward with archived floodplain maps. He revealed that decades ago, this entire neighborhood had been labeled at risk, but no one took action until homeowners like me built barriers. His maps showed in black and white what Karen had denied all along, that the shed wasn't an eyesore. It was critical infrastructure. Her downfall was no longer just in HOA whispers. It was in print, on the evening news, on community Facebook groups filled with angry emojis and furious comments. She had no defense left. The days that followed were something out of a slow-motion train wreck for Karen. Every step she took, every word she tried to throw back at the community only dug her hole deeper. The storm had passed, but the evidence it left behind was undeniable. Watermarks climbing fences, mud trails carving across lawns, and the one dry stretch of property directly behind my shed. Hers. Neighbors took photos, shared them online, and by Monday morning her name was trending locally with headlines like, HOA president nearly destroyed flood barrier. She wanted to be the enforcer of neighborhood beauty, but she became the poster child of ignorance. I tried to keep my head down. I wasn't looking for revenge. I just wanted to be left alone to tend my shed and my land. But the current carried me further than I planned. A city council member called me personally, asking if I'd be willing to speak at a public meeting about private homeowners providing flood protection when municipalities fail. I agreed, thinking it would be a small room of 50 people. Instead, I walked into a packed chamber, news crews filming, people holding up hand-painted signs that said things like, "Protect our protectors," and "Sheds save homes." And then, like a moth to a flame, Karen showed up. She barged into the chamber in a bright red coat, hair lacquered back, and an expression of someone trying to claw back power that had already slipped away. She demanded time at the microphone, claiming she was being slandered, that I staged the storm damage for attention, that the inspector and the city planner were both in on it. Her voice cracked with desperation, and the audience groaned. When it was my turn, I didn't gloat. I laid out the facts step by step. I showed photos of the drainage culvert, the flow path, the engineering diagrams. I held up the vandalized shed door with her spray-painted demand still visible. I didn't need to shout. The truth was louder than anything she could scream. At one point, I turned toward her and said, "Karen, you didn't just threaten me. You threatened everyone behind me. You wanted to remove the very thing standing between this community and disaster." That was when the retired planner stood again. He wasn't a loud man, but when he spoke, the room leaned in. He held up the floodplain maps, pointing to where water would have rushed had my shed been gone. His voice was calm, steady, surgical. "Karen, your own home was spared because of this shed. If you had succeeded in tearing it down, your basement would be condemned right now." Gasps and whispers spread like wildfire, and for once, she had no thingno clipboard, no bylaw, no smirk. Just silence. The HOA board, shaken and exposed, tried to distance themselves from her. Some resigned quietly in the weeks that followed. Others scrambled to apologize to neighbors they had fined over trivial violations. Karen, however, doubled down in the worst way. She filed a lawsuit against me, claiming emotional distress and property devaluation because of unauthorized construction. I almost laughed when the papers arrived, but instead I called my lawyer. We didn't just defend, we countered. Trespassing, vandalism, harassment, defamation. And unlike her binder of photocopied bylaws, I had evidence. Photos, reports, video, witness statements. The courtroom showdown became a spectacle. Reporters filled the benches. Neighbors packed the back rows. Karen strutted in with a new lawyer who looked like he regretted his career choices already. She tried to play victim, crying about how she was bullied, how everyone misunderstood her intentions. But when the judge asked about the vandalism evidence, she stumbled. When pressed on why her boots matched the prints at the scene, she mumbled something about similar designs. The jury wasn't buying it. Neither was the judge. My lawyer stood calmly, stacking the evidence piece by piece until the weight of truth collapsed her entire case. The ruling was swift. Her lawsuit dismissed with prejudice, my countersuit partially granted. She owed damages for the vandalism and harassment, plus legal fees. Watching her face drain of color as the verdict was read was like watching a balloon deflate in real time. But poetic justice wasn't done yet. Just weeks after the trial, another storm rolled through worse than the first. This time, several streets in the next neighborhood overflooded badly, because their HOA had forced homeowners to remove sheds and retaining walls for aesthetic consistency. Families were displaced, thousands of dollars in damages stacked up. News stations ran comparisons, showing side-by-side maps of our community, still dry thanks to the shed Karen hated, against the disaster zones nearby. Her name was dragged back into the spotlight, not as a leader, but as the cautionary tale of what arrogance can destroy. Karen's downfall was brutal and public. She resigned from the HOA not with grace, but with a rambling letter accusing everyone of betrayal. Neighbors ignored it. The community voted in a new board, people who actually cared about safety, not control. For the first time in years, there was laughter at HOA gatherings instead of whispers of dread. People brought food, children played without fear of being scolded for chalk drawings, and the mood lifted like a fog clearing after rain. As for Karen, I'd see her sometimes, shuffling out to get her mail with her head down. The woman who once paraded through the neighborhood like a self-appointed queen now moved like a ghost. Some pitied her, others still burned with anger. I didn't gloat. Life had already punished her harder than I ever could. She lost power, reputation, money, and worst of all, the illusion that she could bend truth to her will. The shed still stands. Stronger now, painted fresh, with a small plaque neighbors insisted on attaching. Community shield. Every storm that comes is a reminder, not just of the water it holds back, but of the lesson it carries. That arrogance crumbles before truth. That neighbors are not enemies, but protectors of one another when they choose to be. The twist I didn't expect came months later when the city awarded me a recognition for private contributions to public safety. The same inspector, the planner, even the council member stood by my side. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, and I felt something deeper than pride. I felt vindication. Not because I beat Karen, but because something ugly turned into something good. And yet, sometimes when I walk past her house, I wonder if she ever truly learned. Or if she still believes, deep down, that she was right and the world conspired against her. Maybe some people never change, but the rest of us did. The neighborhood is stronger now, not because of rules on paper, but because we saw what happens when one person's vendetta nearly drowns everyone. If you've read this far, you probably have an opinion about what Karen did, what I did, and how it all unfolded. Was she just misguided or malicious? Was I too harsh or simply defending myself? Right and wrong don't always draw clean lines, but here they cut deep. I want to know, what do you think? Was Karen's downfall deserved? Or was it too much? Share your thoughts, because stories like this aren't just mine, they belong to every community that has faced a Karen of their own.